Hello, everyone. It's Shane Conto, your Wasteland reviewer, and welcome to the Wasteland Watchlist here on the SPM Crew Podcasting Network. So, this is my weekly show where my guest and I play a little bit of movie roulette and pick a film from my enormous watch list randomly, and could be basically anything. And hopefully, by the end of this episode, you have a new movie to go check out. And joining me yet again on the show for a second time is podcaster, film reviewer. We got Bubbawheat. Thank you so much for coming on.
Hey, it's good to be back.
Awesome. And after our last discussion of one of Ingmar Bergman's films, now we got a little bit of Terrence Malick this time as we talk about Badlands. And to give you all a little bit of background here, so this film was released October 15th, 1973. It's a 93-minute film on a budget of $300,000, starring Martin Sheen and Sissy Spacek. You incorporated James Taylor's uh, song Migration as the theme for the film. This was Malick's directorial debut first feature film, loosely based on real life murder spree of Charles Starkweather and Carol Ann Fugate in 1958. Received high praise critically upon its release, and in 1993 it was put into and preserved by the National Film Registry and Library of Congress. Malick was a protege of Arthur Miller, and Malick began work while at the American Film Institute. Malick raised about half the budget for this film on his own. This was also only Sissy Spacek's second film role. Sheen was inspired by James Dean for his performance, and I think that's pretty interesting, and you could probably tell that upon watching the film. Malick was hesitant about casting Sheen due to his age because he was a little bit older than he was anticipating having the character. A lot of onset tension between the crew and Malick occurred, and they went through like three cinematographers on the film.
Mhm.
So there's a lot of tension there putting this film together. But what were your general thoughts on Badlands?
I thought it was an interesting movie. It's just I this is one of those movies I feel like I probably said the same thing about Cries and Whispers.
Mm,
I had absolutely zero background with what this
mm,
movie was before I started it. I just knew it was 1973. Um, and then I think I saw the poster that it was Martin Sheen and Sissy Spacek, and that was the
mhm,
beginning and ending of what I knew about the movie before starting it. And I will say that the pacing I think is a little bit slower.
mhm.
It did remind me, which again I came to this on my own without reading the trivia, but it reminded me a lot of Natural Born Killers, which
Mhm.
apparently that was also based on the same real life crime couple.
There you go.
So that made a lot of sense, and this definitely feels like kind of a precursor to Natural Born Killers. Only I think this one is a lot more sympathetic to the Holly character, the female character in this
Mhm.
because I did read that even though like the real life woman said that she was even less complicit in the murders, that she was basically kind of a more of a kidnap victim. And this movie shows her as kind of an inactive participant,
Mhm.
that she kind of wasn't active in any of the killings, but she was there and she went along with everything and was with him voluntarily, even though she
Mhm.
wasn't really active in the killing, where, natural born killers, she becomes more of a Bonnie in the Bonnie and Clyde
Mhm.
situation and much more active in the killings.
Well, and that's an interesting point too, because obviously this film came out not too many years after Bonnie and Clyde. And I think on the surface, obviously, we get a lot of comparisons to Bonnie and Clyde. Um, in terms of one from like a filmmaking standpoint, this is a lot less like visceral and in your face in terms of the the energy that it has compared to
Yeah.
like Bonnie and Clyde. And
Yeah, this
also
movie isn't about the violence or glorifying the
mhm,
violence. That this is pretty much like more from Holly's perspective, to
mhm.
where these killings just kind of keep happening. It's like he just randomly kills people and then they move on to the next, the next town.
Well, yeah, and it's definitely from that perspective of like this is a young, impressionable girl being, at least from the film's perspective, being dragged along into this whole entire situation. And her, going from being very like smitten with this man who comes into her life and being very attracted to him and to how he treats her and how this evolves over the course of the film in terms of their relationship because he's obviously a very rebellious kind of person and there's a to her who's very like shut in young woman, there's a lot of things that it's like, oh, this is very alluring about somebody like this coming into my life. But then obviously there's the baggage of him killing people along the way and her having to process that. And whether it's, you know, seems like something out of necessity or like him enjoying this. And where there's definitely moments where it's like you can tell that he's about this. Um, whether it's like when he first shows up to her house and tries to get her to come along with him, and because obviously, I think it's important to point out too is like she's a teenager. Like
Yeah,
there's a
she's 15 and he's
yep.
25, even though the actors are 24 and 32.
Mhm. This is a very licorice pizza age gap in terms of the two characters here. And you know, I think Sissy Spacek does a really good job of playing this character like she is a teenager.
Yeah.
There's just
I
like
mean, even a
this,
couple years later, she goes on to play Carrie.
yeah, even at that point, and it's like she obviously has this innocence about her that she was able to play teenagers well into her 20s. Like any good movies about teenagers, casting people in like almost 30 years old. Um, but here, obviously, I think from like a behind the scenes perspective makes it a lot easier to make this film work when you're dealing with somebody in her early 20s and him in his early 30s playing younger. But it also, I think Spacek does a great job of feeling very innocent and feeling like someone that hasn't really experienced the world
Yeah,
around
and
her
this
and
and the movie uses narration from her, and
mhm,
I think, in a lot of movies, narration is hit and miss. I think it works here because she is a teenager and it feels like her writing in a diary. So I think that that does, you give it a little bit more leeway here.
mhm. And I do think the narration really works here because narration generally it has to accomplish something. It can't just be, well, this is a shortcut for me to do storytelling and stuff like that. And I think how this allows us to be brought into her perspective and what she's going through from this perspective of a teenage girl and who doesn't, you know, fully grasp the danger and the effects of what she's getting into. And I think Spacek's performance really, really works, and her doing the voiceover really works. And
Mhm.
I think to the point that I brought up in terms of some of the notes, you could definitely feel Martin Sheen trying to channel some of that, like James Dean rebellious kind of nature into this role. Um, Obviously he very much has like that white t-shirt and jeans kind of look to him, or like
Yeah, and the
that.
greaser hair.
Yeah,
And
exactly.
just the way he talks and just the magnetism about him. Like he Kit is definitely a character that everybody loves. Like even his
Mhm.
victims seem to be attracted to him, and um even the later on whenever they go to his friend from his garbage truck days,
Mhm.
and he shoots him in the stomach, and the guy doesn't he's not like, hey, you shot me in the stomach. It's
Yeah.
like nothing is said about this. He just quietly and slowly dies on the bed
Mm.
without really saying another word, it, just because of the magnetism of Kit. It's like, he shot me, but he's still existing in front of me. And even whenever they get to the unnamed rich guy's house,
Mhm.
I think that's another scene where he's just like, we're gonna take some things, and do you have a problem with that? And he's like, no, that's fine with me, and I'm gonna take your Corvette. It's like, okay.
Yeah. Well, and I think it's so essential for this to work is that the victims have some kind of connection to him,
Mhm.
and he's able to have that kind of alluring nature to him. And I think
And
Martin Sheen's
and
able to
most of the
accomplish
time,
that.
and other than the three bounty hunters, like
Hmm.
he gives most of his victims, you know, somewhat of like he has interactions with them
Hmm.
before he kills them. Like even the his first victim, Holly's father,
Hmm.
he gives him like so many chances. It's like, hey, I've got a gun. This is what it sounds like when I shoot it.
Yeah.
Whenever he shoots it on the ground, and then and the father keeps going for the phone to call the authorities, and then that's whenever he finally shoots him.
Well, and I think that's a really key piece to this is that you have to understand why Holly falls for him. You have to understand why some of these other characters kind of get lulled into some kind of bit of a safety net.
Mhm.
And it's Martin Sheen gives a fantastic performance here. And I feel like he's a kind of actor. He's obviously been acting for a very long time and doesn't really get brought up into like that kind of discussion for some of these actors that have had such longevity. Because like this was the very early 1970s, and he's been in so many different things. And here, I think he really captures that energy well. And I think the chemistry between him and Sissy Spacek really works for the film. And you have all these different, smaller roles, and everybody feels very authentic in terms of
Mhm.
because like this is kind of out in
I'm pretty sure
nowhere.
this is pre-apocalypse now.
Yes. So this is probably about like 5 years or so before, and obviously that was a pretty harrowing experience for Martin Sheen, seeing as he almost died making that movie. And having a heart attack and everything. And this is one of those kinds of films that if there's one thing that most people know about Terrence Malick, it's usually how gorgeous his work is, like from a visual standpoint. And I feel like this might not feel as overtly like artistic, but he's still able to really capture the beauty of this like wide open space of the nature of this part of the country, and just capturing that kind of open range and feeling of being out on the road and everything. It's a really
and
gorgeous
it
film.
and then even the kind of weird like Swiss Family Robinson second act.
Mhm. Yeah, for sure. It's one of those kinds of films that this is very much that late 60s, early 70s kind of counterculture rebellious kind of film. And like I said, it makes a lot of sense that this kind of comes in the bit of the shadow of like Bonnie and Clyde, and which that year that came out was such a big year of shifting ideas in filmmaking and Hollywood. And I feel like this kind of film, and also for like a first film, like a feature film for a director, I think there's so much about this that just really works. And I'm really not surprised that Terrence Malick became such a big fixture in terms of filmmaking and, is still out there making films today. And he doesn't make them often, but when he does, he's still able to get some serious attention and make an impact with them for sure.
Mhm.
I guess, are there any other big things that stood out to you about the film that you wanted to discuss?
I mean, kind of just going back to this character that
Mhm,
Kit is making himself, that uh, even though he's not like super flashy, he's not it was Woody Harrelson in Natural Born Killers, right?
yes.
He
Mhm,
he's a far cry from Woody Harrelson,
yeah.
but at the same time, this is he still plays a character that is that has his mindset on how this story will be played out
Mhm,
in the past. Like even from the very beginning, after he shoots the father, and then he sets up the whole arson with the suicide, and he goes and records this suicide message on a vinyl record. Like
mhm,
that is just something that's so out there and so charismatic. And then he kind of repeats that in the rich guy's house whenever he has the recording machine and he's recording a message. And then again at the very end of the movie, after like whenever he gets captured, he decides to give himself up, but he wants
mhm.
to not make it look like he gave himself up, so he shoots his tire out so he can
Yeah.
claim that he had a flat tire, and that's why they caught him. And he builds this rock cairn, and it's like, this is the place where you caught me.
Mhm.
And
It,
then he just he talks up all the police officers and the army afterwards, and everybody just falls in love with him. This like this mass murder, this serial killer
mhm,
basically that's gone on this killing spree. He's killed what, like 8 or 9 people over the course of the
mhm.
movie.
And some of those moments are very shocking in terms of like even like getting that like couple into that basement and just blindly shooting into it and stuff like that. And I thought that was very fascinating that like this man is so committed to controlling his own narrative about this to like it's an unexpected way for how this film ended because I think most films like this you would expect this to go down in a blaze of glory.
Yeah,
um
kind of like Bonnie and Clyde.
yeah, and he's the kind of person that like he had this controlled all the time and he's the one that hands himself over and specifically is able to control that narrative of himself, and I think that makes it such an interesting and fascinating character. And I'll admit, obviously you brought up Natural Born Killers, like the hugest fan of that film. I remember watching that for the first time and just being like, this is way too much for me. I feel like even Quentin Tarantino, who uh wrote it, was just like, I do not like what Oliver Stone did to my screenplay.
But I
Um
think I watched that movie at just the right time, and I haven't
mhm,
seen it since. So, my memories of Natural Born Killers are my memories as, honestly, like I think late teen, early 20 was probably the last time I've seen it. So it's been over 20 years since I've seen that movie. So I'm kind of remembering it in that young adult headspace.
mhm.
So that's like the perfect time to watch that movie.
Well, yeah, it's because it definitely has that rebellious, high energy kind of experience, and it's very in your face. And this is extremely different tonally,
Mm.
especially because Malik is not has no interest in taking this in fast-paced, aggressive, in your face kind of experience. You're you're in it, and it feels very engrossing in that way. And
Yeah, I have an 18-year-old daughter, and she kind of came in and out while I was watching this movie, and she thought it was incredibly boring.
And that's the thing, like this is only 90, like 94 minutes. So it's not
Hmm.
even a particularly long film either. It takes time. It takes its time in terms of setting it up and capturing the feeling of it. And it has a very interesting resolution to it because it's not how you would expect this kind of film to wrap up, but it does have, I feel like it has a lot to say about especially our society today when it comes to serial killers and stuff like that, because boy do we like giving a lot of attention to serial killers and true crime stuff. And Kit's the kind of person that's just like, I'm gonna be admired and thought about a lot, and he's gonna
Yeah,
be eating
it's
that up.
crazy. Like I
Mhm,
recently, started listening to a few more true crime podcasts, and I listened to one that talked about the how serial killers just, especially like the more attractive ones like Ted
mhm.
Bundy especially had got tons and tons of fan mail,
Yep.
and that they have all these admirers basically, even though they're convicted serial killers.
Well, and it's very interesting because I feel like, especially around this time, Martin Sheen could have played Ted Bundy, in something and really captured that kind of energy, of it. And Ted Bundy is like I'm air quoting here for those listening, the super attractive serial killer, which like for 1970s he was like a decent looking guy, and especially used that for his advantage, unfortunately. And, you know, we do see how Kit leverages his charisma to lure people in and for them to have this false sense of security. And yeah, and then the next thing you know, you take a shotgun blast to the stomach, or and it's scary watching him, like at any given moment, like the wrong thing happens and things go sideways quick. And I think that was especially true about that situation where, like, the the former friend colleague guy, like you can see he's like slowly about to start running towards his house, and the second he realizes it, he just shifts into a completely different gear and just starts chasing after him. And it's just like he can be scary. And I think that's definitely where like Holly starts really realizing it's like this man that I'm with might be really charming and have like swept me away, but he's a dangerous person.
Yeah, I believe
And
the exact quote was is something like, "I've never known someone who is so trigger happy."
mhm, and Kit certainly is for sure. But I think this is a fascinating film to check out now, because especially with the kinds of films Terrence Malick does now, like Tree of Life and stuff like that, where it's this very big thematic kind of experiential kinds of films. It is interesting to see him do something so grounded um in this kind of space. And then obviously Martin Sheen and Sissy Spacek give some fantastic performances in this. But I guess, do you have any other final thoughts on the film?
I don't, not too much. I do think that a lot of it does feel slow. I mean, I
Hmm.
imagine that it is purposefully slow,
Hmm.
but it's still pretty slow. There's a lot of focus on just the moments in between the killings, and I know a lot of that especially is just to make this contrast between, because like Kit himself, it's like he flips a switch, he is trigger happy, he starts gunning people down, and then it's just like, okay, let's let's get in the car and let's go get some gas. Let's figure out what we're gonna do next. But like in that's very, it's the contrast between this very short, brief, fast-paced action of the killing, and then immediately after that, it's like there's not any rush to hide the body.
Hmm.
It's just like, it's very slow, methodical, um, emotionless in a lot of ways, and even he doesn't really have an explanation. Like he does eventually drag his friend into this like trailer, and Holly asks him, well, why'd you do that? And he just says, well, I didn't want him to be out in the sun.
Hmm. For sure. And from my experiences watching any Terrence Malick film, he certainly is perfectly fine taking his time in those quieter moments in terms of his stories and everything. This one just happens to be about a killing spree and a serial killer. So it's a little bit of a different kind of experience. But thank you so much for coming on and chatting about Badlands with me.
Absolutely.
And thank all of you for listening. Make sure to like, comment, and share on this episode. Do you have any particular favorite films from Terrence Malick or any experiences with him, his filmography? Make sure to follow or subscribe wherever you listen to your podcast, as the SPM Crew Podcasting Network is ever growing, welcoming new guests onto our show and trying out some new podcasts. I know, especially we even have a new Tolkien podcast, and they certainly know a lot about Middle Earth, talking about on there. But we have plenty of podcasts about film and television and other topics for you to all check out. And if you like our logo, go check out HiFlyer Creative for all your digital marketing needs. And most importantly, thank you as always for tuning in and supporting the Wasteland Watchlist here on the SPDM Crew Podcasting Network.